one of us as we seek to do your will this day, that our words may be pleasing to your sight, our works be pleasing to your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is now in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021, to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
Question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to
Honorable Leader,
move
Government
the
Business.
first reading of the Needham's Point Holdings Limited Exchange and Issue of Bonds Bill 2021.
Second, please.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Yes, sir.
Government business is now the order of the day.
Order number 2, in the name of the Honorable Minister of Energy, Small Business, and Entrepreneurship, to move the second reading of the Control of Inefficient Lighting Bill 2021.
Honorable Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I begin by making the observation that electricity generation in Barbados is almost entirely dependent on imported fossil fuels and accounts for at least 50% of the country's fuel imports. And that, Mr. Speaker, perhaps as far back as 2010, an analysis of this sector was done by the International Monetary Fund, and they recognized that oil imports represented 7.5% of the country's gross domestic product. So it stands to reason, therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the issue of our efficient management of the energy we consume is very critical to the Barbados economy, and by extension to the well-being of the average Barbadian consumer and obviously the operations and the cost of operations of all businesses in Barbados. We are here today, sir, to take a very important step that, quite frankly, because it is a very simple bill, quite frankly, sir, should have been dealt with a long time ago under the last administration. So in a real sense, we are tidying up, yet again, the failings of the past administration and dealing with the consequences of the fallout of the negligence of that administration. The control of inefficient lighting, sir, is now before this House in the form of a bill, and it is drafted to provide for the phased elimination of and the phased removal from sale of inefficient electrical lamps in Barbados. Now, there are a number of reasons why we need to do this, sir, and as I indicated to you before, quite frankly, we should have been here a long time ago. First of all, we are talking about the phased removal or elimination from the use and sale of inefficient electrical lamps, and they really are the incandescent bulbs. You would know, sir, the pear-shaped bulb that you're accustomed screwing in, or if you prefer, using by way of bayonet at your, but I don't know if you use it at your residence, but certainly as a little boy, you and I would have been very familiar with those bulbs. And the incandescent bulbs, sir, that we grew up with would have existed for the last 145 odd years. These bulbs are notoriously inefficient because they waste most of the energy that they generate by producing heat. And so therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, there have been a number of efforts around the world to find successor types of technology for these inefficient bulbs. We have, for example, sir, the CFL or compact fluorescent lamp, which would be the first generation, and that lifespan of that bulb, sir, is more effective in that it lasts approximately 3 times longer than would have the incandescent bulb on average. In more recent times, we've come to use the LED, which is the light-emitting diode bulb, and that is said to have a lifespan, which is perhaps as much as 25 years longer than the old-fashioned incandescent bulb would have given. But the fact of the matter is, sir, that in spite of having these newer technologies available, and I must say they have been available for quite some time, there is still, in the presence of the Barbados marketplace, the practice of purchasing incandescent bulbs, and they're still offered for sale here in Barbados. And the policy really is to phase out the availability of these bulbs because, as I said, they are extremely inefficient, and to do so in a way that is manageable, that does not immediately impact on consumers. So we're very sensitive to the reality of the time. We do not equally, Mr. Speaker, and I will elaborate on this, do not want to be unkind or unfair to those people who sell those bulbs. So we're giving them a fair period of time to make the necessary adjustment after having gone out of our way to make sure we did the necessary consultation before we came here. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is something that we have to do and that we have to get on with because this is something that, quite frankly, should have been dealt with some time ago. The second very important reason why we have to control inefficient lighting in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, is related to the global need to reduce carbon emissions. And I think that you would be familiar, sir, with the fact that we have for some time been discussing carbon emissions in Barbados. The last administration was very conservative about this matter. They had a target set that by the year 2039, I believe it was, 29% of this country's energy would be generated by way of renewable energy means. I want to say that again, that by the year 2039, we would be looking at 29% of our energy being generated by renewable energy means. And Mr. Speaker, sir, obviously we are looking at two two trains of development. One is the efficient use of energy, which is the replacement of the bulbs so that we have efficient lighting and efficient energy bulbs in our homes, in our places of business, in all of the commercial and industrial areas of Barbados' activity. But at the same time, sir, we also are looking at going into renewable energy. And in so doing, we want to be able to get there as quickly as is practicable, because the more we move away from a reliance on fossil fuel energy, sir, the better we and the more kind we are to our economic circumstances. And I will elaborate on that a little bit more as I go on. But the fact is, sir, that with regards specifically to the question of conserving our environment, many countries around the world have signaled and demonstrated their commitment to taking steps towards conserving the environment. And Mr. Speaker, sir, part of the global undertakings and the global commitments of countries now on a yearly basis have been to implement plans to and to demonstrate concrete plans for the replacement of bulbs such as these incandescent bulbs that we are talking about, and to come about with more efficient lighting plans for their countries. Just to give you a glance, sir, so that you would know that we're not here alone and not going on a frolic of our own. In Australia, from as far back as February 2007, the Australian federal government announced a minimum energy performance standard for lighting products, and they began their phase out of the retail of these incandescent bulbs, sir, from 2009. In the European Union as a whole, the European Union in 2009 initiated a Europe-wide gradual phase-out of these incandescent bulbs. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it was not to exclude any of the member states of the European Union. The state of California in the United States, and the United States perhaps is an interesting case study, because while we originally gave ourselves to the year 2039 to become 29% renewable energy dependent, the United States, much like the Democratic Labour Party, sought to approach this matter in a similar way, taking sweet time. And so therefore, by the year 2050, they are going to be in a position, or they're anticipating being in a position, where they have removed as much carbon from their economy as they inject into it. But Mr. Speaker, the state of California perhaps was a little bit more aggressive than the country of the United States as a whole. And in California, their phase out of inefficient lighting bulbs was to be complete by the year 2018. And there are other parts of the world where this process has been going on. Now, sir, the fact of the matter is that the government of Barbados, as it is currently constituted by this administration today, sir, has maintained a very clear domestic and international posture with respect to this matter of energy efficiency, and also by extension renewable energy, and trying to make the economy as free of fossil fuel reliance as is possible. The first position that we take, sir, is that we want to reduce the cost of energy in Barbados. And that is absolutely imperative. The House, sir, needs to be reminded that on an annual basis, between $450 million and, in a bad year, as much as $800 million. I think that is the worst that we have experienced during the last decade and a half. Between $450 million and $800 million, Mr. Speaker, sir, is spent on the importation of fossil fuels. That, sir, is money which could be better spent and could be redirected to areas of national development which cry out for attention, which cry out for continued support and reinvestment. The area of healthcare, Mr. Speaker, sir, we all know that it is a long and torturous journey to get to where we ideally would wish to be, and it requires a lot of capital investment. Educating our young people, Mr. Speaker, sir, again, a very torturous journey, very critical journey, but very capital intensive if we are to maintain our schools. In fact, one of the challenges that this administration also had to come to terms with, sir, is the wide scope of repairs that were needed and continue to have to be done with regard to the schools that were so badly neglected over the course of the period 2008 to 2018. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I could go on and on. Rural development, I need not say urban development as well, and the need for us to be able to make sure, as we were having a conversation here only this morning, that some of our citizens, especially those who are elderly and those who are more vulnerable, can have their houses future-proofed so that there is at least a fair chance of them being able to withstand the ravages of bad weather and so on, Mr. Speaker. So the reality is that we have to be able to find a way to conserve where possible and save wherever possible so that on average $600 million a year does not have to be spent on the importation of fossil fuels into this country. The other important thing that we're focusing on, Mr. Speaker, sir, is the increase in energy security for the island. And let us face the facts. Barbados' energy security is a serious matter that has to be dealt with by serious dialogue and helping the country to come to an understanding of the full scope of the challenges that we face. We are largely importers of the energy product, Mr. Speaker, sir. We, yes, have a smidgen, a small amount of natural gas produced on the island, and maybe we would be able to fuel 20-30% of the homes in the country with that. But Mr. Speaker, sir, we can't run the cars on the street. We can't provide the heavy fuel oil for electrification of the country on our own. We rely on sourcing that product on the international marketplace. And I take time to explain this, sir, because this is not a matter that is just easily dealt with, as some would wish to do, by simply sitting in the front seat of a car and doing a blog. It is sometimes, sir, necessary for all of us, members of the press and their role as the fourth estate, well-intentioned citizens, as I have no doubt many bloggers are, and equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, those of us who are fortunate to have been elected to this place to be able to take some time and explain to people what the circumstances are. We are now, between the month of January and now, this country has seen a 61% increase in the price of fuel on the international market. 61% increase. That, sir, has absolutely nothing to do with any taxation that the government of Barbados has levied. That is just the reality of the circumstances that we are faced with. So when I speak about energy security, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm speaking about a state of affairs where we have to deal with the fluctuation on the international marketplace of prices in circumstances, sir, where we have little or no control. It was not this government, sir, that determined that what other people do in order to safeguard against price fluctuation. There's a practice known as hedging. Was not, and investing in the futures market was not the way to go. But Mr. Speaker, sir, let us understand how that works as well. Because, you know, during the COVID shutdown, the whole world came to a pause. No planes were flying, or hardly any. No ships were sailing, or hardly any. No cars were traveling along the major highways of the world, not even in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, sir. And so therefore, there was no demand for oil. And you literally you could have been paid, sir. People in the Middle East producing oil would have paid you to take it off of their hands because suddenly it became worthless. No demand whatsoever. But then, Mr. Speaker, sir, as economies reopen and there is a surge in economic activity, and every single country on planet Earth has the same mission that we have, to kickstart their economy. So they're trying to do more and faster in order to make up for lost time and to save jobs domestically. That surge in economic activity, sir, demands more pull on fuel, and prices skyrocket. And people play a game with the cost of prices because it makes money for them. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is a reality that you have to deal with. The market fluctuates wildly. And even when you try to ride the market in terms of the fortunes that you may have by way of going into futures, the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is a game of chance at times. And so therefore, where we are now is a 61% increase in fuel over the last 5 or so months. And obviously, as the Prime Minister has indicated, and indeed as Cabinet has deliberated upon only last Thursday, there are some serious economic calculations that we have to look at. And I say just for the benefit of the country from this place, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is not a matter that is being taken lightly by any stretch of the imagination by the government. There is no minister. There is no minister, contrary to what those people who spend a lot of wasted time on social media say. There is no minister who can go to a pump in Barbados and say, fill my tank, and don't pull his pocket personally. All of us, Mr. Speaker, sir, drive our own motor cars. I may speak with the exception of the Prime Minister of Barbados, but that is a solitary situation. And I don't think anybody would want to detract from at least that office having some benefit. But all of us, Mr. Speaker, sir, are consumers in the same way that our constituents are. We are not shielded in any way. The leader of the opposition is not shielded in any way. We're all in this boat together. And therefore, sir, it is a matter that requires the fullest consideration and the most careful analysis of how we treat to these matters. And again, I have to remind the House that there was a time when we had absolutely no control over some of the payments we had to make. You know, when you paid road taxes for a private vehicle, you had to pay your road taxes or be on the road illegally and attract the penalty of the law. Now, because it is dealt with at the pump, you have an element of discretion with respect to how much you are journeying, whether you can pool your resources in terms of your neighbor driving with you today and you driving with your neighbor tomorrow, where you are going and who takes you there. All of these are options, Mr. Speaker, sir, which this country is going to have to begin to look at, because the reality is that this is how the rest of the world operates. There are parts of the world, sir, where people carpool on a daily basis. There are cities in the world where people drive into the city in alternating vehicle numbers. So that if your vehicle is an odd number, ends with an odd number, then you are unable to enter the city today. If it is an even number, then you go tomorrow. That is what happens around the world. We have been very fortunate to have been shielded from some of these things, but the reality is it is a conversation that the country is going to have if the country is going to maturely and seriously treat to some of these issues, which are really beyond our immediate capacity to simply absorb. That is said without prejudice to any step that the government may take, and as the Prime Minister has already indicated, we will continue to deliberate upon so that we can determine, after having met as well with the social partnership in short order, what steps we may take with regard to capping any particular type of tax that is now in existence. And where that cap would take place would also have to be determined. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the other concern we obviously have is to mitigate the negative effect of the energy consumption on local and global environment, which is really the reduction of our footprint. And I believe that I started to treat to that a little bit earlier. And so therefore, sir, we have come to a point where we are now going to pursue the course of action outlined in this particular piece of legislation. The national energy policy was laid in this House in May, I think it was, of 2019, by the Honourable Member for Christchurch East. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, it has as its second goal the objective of ensuring energy security and energy affordability via consumption and production occurring with maximum level of efficiency wherever possible. So what we are talking about in terms of efficient lighting and regulating, intervening in the marketplace to regulate efficient lighting and to ensure that inefficient lighting is not something that consumers are lured into spending precious resources on, that perfectly aligns with the national energy policy created by this government. I want to say that again because there are those who believe that this government is insensitive in some way, shape, or form to the peril confronting consumers. That is a situation that must be dealt with in several ways because there are several types of intervention which are being looked at and which are being crafted because the situation confronting consumers in this country is a serious one. And will continue for some time to be a serious one, largely because we do not set prices, we are price takers in this economy. And the fact of the matter is, therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, that wherever it is possible, we have to ensure that we can maintain a standard of living for our people which is satisfactory, while at the same time shielding them as best as possible without doing grave damage to commerce at the same time, and making sure, sir, that there is a balance that is felt across the island. Now, sir, it therefore means that, as I said, the question of maximum level of efficiency is the issue before us today, and specifically with regard to this bill. Now, the House needs to be made aware, sir, that it was in 2011 that a study was done by a company, a firm, a consultancy firm, and I have it here, called Castalia Strategic Advisors. A phase-out plan for energy-efficient lighting in Barbados. Government of Barbados, 2nd of September 2011, sir. And that study informed the government of the day that they ought to take seriously the issue of cost to residential and commercial customers, and that the country as a whole could be saved as much as 33% of its energy cost if it were to move to efficient lighting. That was made apparent in 2011, Mr. Speaker, sir. The clear understanding, therefore, was that by eliminating inefficient energy expenditure and terminating the imports of inefficient light bulbs and terminating the sale and use of inefficient light bulbs, you would be trimming the energy costs for the entire economy by 1/3. That was a clear understanding. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, this government, of which we are now part, came to office in 2018. And I know that there are those who would wish that we were so gifted that we were able to do that which mortal man elsewhere is unable to achieve, and that we would be able, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the stroke of a pen, in spite of a pandemic, in spite of all of the corrective actions that have to be taken in so many, almost every sector and department of this country's administrative affairs, that we could have dealt with this immediately too. I won't come to that because I seek no quarter in this particular matter and ask for none. The fact of the matter is, sir, that in 2011, if the full story is to be told, a phase-out plan was submitted to the Cabinet of Barbados by the Ministry of Energy, or rather the Division of Energy and Telecommunications as it then was, which, interestingly enough, in 2011, was located, you guessed it, in the office of the Prime Minister, no less. And so therefore, that office took to Cabinet a paper requesting Cabinet's blessing and imprimatur so that we would be in a position to have a phase-out of inefficient lighting for Barbados. Cabinet gave its blessing in 2011, in September of 2011. I think it's September 15th. And Mr. Speaker, sir, no reason has been given as to why the Division of Energy and Telecommunications, located, as I say, in the Prime Minister's office, no less at that time, did not follow through on the command of the Cabinet. But the fact is, sir, that in spite of the blessing of Cabinet being given, nothing was done, which is what causes me to be here today in order to do that which Cabinet in 2011 mandated to be done or ought to be done in the interest of saving the economy of the country a sum of money which may, on average, if you look at the way the figures would go, if you have 6 years of inaction between 2011 and 2018, and you're saying that you would have, on average, a spend of $600 million on energy costs, and that electricity runs at about 50% of the country's energy costs, it would mean, sir, that you would be costing the country, by doing nothing, approximately $100 million a year. So that, sir, $600 million later, that's the cost of the ineptitude of the last administration. The honorable member for Christchurch West had to take this country on a journey into the squandermania that took place, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the Ministry of the Environment, I believe it was at that time, where they left bobcats, and they left trucks, and they left other pieces of heavy equipment, sir, all costing the country money, but left it to waste, to ruin, to run, to rot. The honorable member's calculations were that it might have costed us about $5 million in losses. Today, sir, I can point you to $600 million more squandered. And these people who, sir, would have their new generation, and I have no doubt some of the old, who continue to hide behind the scenes and operate like master puppeteers, dangling the puppet from their string, waiting for an opportunity once again to be at the buffet table as they see government. These people, sir, will come knocking on your constituents' doors, Mr. Speaker, sir. They will come about having the temerity and the audacity to come and knock on the door in broad daylight and say, give the Democratic Labour Party a chance. A chance to do what? There has been, Mr. Speaker, sir, there has been no humility about these matters. You know, I recall as I speak, sir, the book of Chronicles where they say, sir, that you have to humble yourself, pray, and turn from your wicked ways, and then the Lord will forgive you and heal your land. But their land can't be healed, Mr. Speaker, sir, if they show no forgiveness and humility. Or there's no penitence. And when they come at the door of your constituents, you must tell them, sir, as I tell mine. Remind them in the language of Proverbs. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. There was no industry in that administration. So how can you justify, sir, that in 2011 September, Cabinet issues a command that you are to take action in order to save an economy, what could be the equivalent of $100 to $200 million a year? And I'm going to be conservative in my estimation and go with $100 million. It can't be less. And Mr. Speaker, sir, you are issued that command, and by 2018, nothing whatsoever has been done. And do you recognize, Mr. Speaker, sir, that between 2011 and 2018, there were 2 administrations of the Democratic Labour Party? 2. They were elected in 2013. Now, there are those who will clamor to say that perhaps it was an oversight, and I concede that oversight is possible. But I need not tell you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I need not tell you, because you know, because you have practiced at the bar, that there's such a thing as negligence, and there's such a thing as criminal negligence. And the constituent elements of criminal negligence are here before us, you know. The constituent elements, Mr. Speaker, sir, of having a duty of care, a duty to act, and that duty not having been taken. That duty is observed only in the breach. Mr. Speaker, sir, the constituent element of being able to point to a breach, but the breach is clear. Since 2011, Cabinet instructed that something be done, that the Division of Energy in the Prime Minister of Barbados' office at the time take certain steps to make sure that there was a phase-out plan for inefficient lighting, to come and do exactly what we are doing here now, Mr. Speaker, sir, and they didn't do nothing about it, cost every taxpayer, every business house, every industry operator in Barbados a loss of money. That takes you into the third constituent element, sir, the causation. They caused them to lose money. And the last of the elements will be the damage, the sums of money lost. This country has been humbled by the recklessness of the last administration, Mr. Speaker, sir. And these people who see this as a game feel it is fit and proper not to offer the country any explanation on these matters. Not a fella who is seeking office in George Street come August has uttered a word of explanation. Indeed, one of them subsequently was a minister responsible for the same area that the Honorable Member for Christchurch West pointed the country to and the $5 million squandered. Not a word offered by way of explanation or justification if he felt so strongly about it. And you will hear nothing about this either, Mr. Speaker, sir. You will hear nothing about this. But it is good to run about and say, look, see me here, I want to vote. And this is where it goes horribly wrong. And that's what causes my heart to bleed when I see people who should know better giving them succor. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, we continue as a country to be imperiled by the willful disregard and the under-accomplishment of the last administration. Now, it is clear, therefore, that persons' financial interests were injuriously affected, and the country's financial interests were equally injuriously affected, Mr. Speaker, sir. Now, as a consequence of that circumstance, when we came to office, we had to make some decisions. And I want to account for the time spent between coming to office and now, because I know I will hear that, and I seek no quarter in this matter. When once it had been drawn to the attention of the former minister responsible for energy, Honourable Member for Christchurch East, Mr. Speaker, sir, came to the Cabinet of Barbados and did the right thing, drew it to the attention of the Cabinet that there had been wanton disregard of a previous Cabinet decision which carried with it substantial financial losses as a consequence of the disregard to the country, to the taxpayers, to the consumers, to the business people in Barbados, all of whom must use electricity, and all of whom had been, during that last period of time, substantially underutilizing energy-efficient lighting. Cabinet determined then, sir, that we have to go back to the Chamber of Commerce because a lot of time had passed. We're talking about 6-7 years later. A lot of time had passed. So you go back to the Chamber of Commerce and you ask the Chamber what their position is, because they are the representative body for those people who are importing these things into the country. What are the circumstances in the marketplace right now? To what extent are these bulbs still being imported? None of us don't run a hardware store, just like how none of us don't run a gas station. So none of us get any special favors. We too are consumers. All of us are consumers. There's no special dispensation for the Cabinet. And so therefore, sir, Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet, like any other body in Barbados who have to deal with consumption, want to know what is the current circumstances, what are the costs of these things, and what steps might be adequate today. We went back to the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Green Committee of the Chamber would have deliberated on this matter, sought the counsel and the input of all of their members, people who run in hardware stores and whoever else might be involved in importation and sale, retail of these bulbs, Mr. Speaker, sir. And as far as government was concerned, we were reaffirming or prepared to reaffirm the previous decision that there should be a phased restriction on the importation and sale of inefficient lights in Barbados. Now I've gone to the trouble of outlining these steps because when the critics who feel instinctively that there's nothing better to do this good Tuesday morning that I wake up than but to criticize the government for something. When the critics want to have a knee-jerk reaction of criticism, the critics, I invite them, because I know in this business, and as soon as you get to midterm in the life of an administration, it accelerates. And that is as sure as day follows night. But I invite all the critics, including he who sits in this house, to reflect on the governance issue which this approach has taught us. Because while on one hand we had an administration that understood an issue at the level of the cabinet, but then they do nothing about it, and they follow up about nothing, and it didn't matter because, quite frankly, it just didn't matter. Nobody did nothing about it for 5, 6, going on 7 years. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, sir, we took the significant, decisive step in the interest of the consumer's well-being to say, look, let us go back and see what is happening with the situation at the level of the people who are importing and retailing and get an understanding of what is happening in the market today. The second thing that we did, Mr. Speaker, sir, was to demonstrate the good governance approach by allowing the chamber to have an input before cabinet made a final decision. Are you with me, sir? We didn't just sit down and say as overlords that this was going to happen. We went and did the assessment, so I can stand here and say, and it is a shameful thing for a minister in Barbados to have to say that in spite of the cabinet of Barbados giving a decision in 2011 and then doing nothing about it, that the people of this country, in their wisdom and in their better judgment, started as a market to move away from the incandescent bulb, Mr. Speaker, sir, to move away and to find alternative forms of efficient lighting. They used their good judgment because their government had failed them. And this, sir, perhaps is the story to be told, that consumerism is not about the fanfare and the spotlight for 2 minutes. Whether you are on a radio blurb or a WhatsApp blog or some other social media platform, it is about structure and organization in the wider interests of the common good of the country. I, as a minister, sir, salute the people of the country for having taken conscious steps to avail themselves of more efficient lighting, even despite the fact that the government that they elected turned a blind eye and a deaf ear in their direction. Now, Mr. Speaker, where are we now then? We felt, as I said, that in view of the fact that 7 years had elapsed, we had to consult with the chamber, and we did so, and the chamber came back and they indicated that as far as they were concerned, it was still an issue, but it was an issue that the market had started to respond to by its own volition. They noted, however, and this is where Cabinet got the benefit of the consultation, they noted, however, that there are still some areas where you cannot get the equivalent or the energy efficient equivalent of an incandescent bulb. So as much as the world is making these grand proclamations of moving, and I tell you about the European Union, Mr. Speaker, sir, I have treated you to an understanding of what happened in Australia, the state of California, other places. The reality is that they're the people who are industrially producing these bulbs. But they themselves have not yet reached the stage where they can have an energy efficient equivalent of the incandescent bulb in some types of commodity. So that, for example, sir, ovens are produced and you pull the oven door and it has in the incandescent bulb. I do not know why it don't have an LED. I will never make an oven in my life or design one. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are told it is impossible to find one in this country, and none are imported. So therefore, that ain't working. Mr. Speaker, sir, equally the refrigerator, same principle applies. And the lights on the runway at the airport, same principle applies. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet, having benefited from consultation with the Chamber of Commerce on this matter, had then to draft the legislation in such a way that it granted exemptions so that we could not have an across-the-board policy. As strongly as I feel that there should be no inefficient light bulbs brought into Barbados, sir, you still had to make the exemptions in the interest of good governance and proper governance and the well-being of the people. Otherwise, the same people who we seek to protect will be the people who we will be humbugging inadvertently, because all of a sudden, a new stove will be impossible to source. A refrigerator, impossible to source. And what kind of foolish people these will be that we elect. That is what it's about. And this again, Mr. Speaker, so I take my time to go through it because I want the critics to understand that this is not a business where you wake up a morning and you look next door and you say, I didn't really like being around my neighbor, or I vex with people in my house. Let me find something better to do with my life. And so I'm going to find a constituency to foist my offensive self upon. And I am going to go into politics. Because the boy don't send a call you. You're going into politics. Not knowing head nor tail of what it is you're going to do. But walk about, criticize, confuse, create pandemonium in the people's place. This is what it has unfortunately dissolved into. And it has to be bigger than that. It is about national development and national interests. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, you go to the legislation now, and you will find the exemption at Section 13.2, Section 14, and Section 15 of the bill, which is before the House, for the proposed restriction of import and sale of lights which do not meet minimum efficiency performance standards. Yeah. You will find the exemptions to them. And the exemptions, Mr. Speaker, sir, are located in the first schedule of the bill. And as I said, they touch and concern areas like the airport runway lights, automobile lights. And again, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are some automobile models where you're not going to get you're going to get the light that is incandescent, like mine. Well, my gas guzzler. I sometimes wish that you could sit down and have a conversation with the nation, because, sir, people believe that we don't feel the pain. We live the pain. Why don't get no travel allowance for driving about in my constituency? Mr. Speaker, it comes out of my pocket. Every yard I drive, I have to pay for. How could I stop at every gas station to spend $3? Mr. Speaker, sir, not that I have a problem with awareness about the idea. I have to have, Mr. Speaker, sir, a relationship with the reality surrounding the idea. Because I drive about like everybody else and pay for it like every member on this front bench pays for it, sir, and the back bench too, and the leader of the opposition too. And Mr. Speaker, sir, whether you're talking about laboratory equipment, I mean, in the middle of COVID, lab working night and day, 24 hours a day. But there are pieces of equipment, sensitive pieces of equipment in that lab where you cannot get an energy efficient bulb. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to compromise the function of the lab? So therefore, the legislation had to be crafted in such a way. And I thank the Chamber of Commerce from this place, sir, for giving us the guidance. And I have to also thank the Cabinet for being sufficiently sensitive that we took our time in a measured and meaningful way, though, to make sure that we got this right, so that we could come here without creating unintentional harm and making a bad situation worse for people. And so the exemptions, Mr. Speaker, sir, range from airport runway lights, automobile lights, freezers, stoves, laboratory equipment, medical equipment. Good Lord. I said stove lighting, and I don't need to go through it all, sir. They are there in the bill. Now the restriction on imports and the restriction on sales are scheduled. And this is an important point, sir, because the minimum efficiency performance standard is set for Barbados by the Barbados National Standards Institute. And we've decided, sir, to begin at 15 lumens per watt, which is, in other words, preventing import on the most inefficient general lighting service bulb. That's what you call the bulbs, sir, the incandescent bulbs. They're called general lighting service bulbs. And we begin with the most inefficient of them, phasing them out of the market altogether and permitting imports to continue on those which are a little bit more efficient. But systematically reaching a stage where from 15 you go to the next level, from the next level you go to the one after that to when we have removed all of them from the market. Mr. Speaker, sir, the restriction on the 15-watt bulb will begin from January 1st, 2022. That is restriction on import, and we give the business people the benefit of from today, which is the 29th of May, until, sir, the 30th.
June, sir.
Sorry, 20th of June, until the 30th of June, 2022, when they will no longer be able to sell. So that we don't have to go through the national turmoil and the wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth like what we did with the plastic bags, sir. Everybody is put on notice and has had the benefit for, in terms of those who sell, of 1 year, a full year, to put your house in order so that you will no longer be importing those 15-watt incandescent bulbs. With regard to the energy, the minimum efficiency performance standard of 25 watts, 25 lumens per watt, or what we call a 25-watt bulb, bayonet, or screw, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, the import restriction will begin in July 1st, 2022. You will not be able to import it from that time, and to deal with your stock, you will not be able to sell after the 31st of December 2022. So the sale restriction begins on the 31st of December 2022. Going up to the next level, you have the 40-watt bulb, what is properly called a 40 lumens per watt. We call it a 40-watt bulb, bayonet, or screw. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the import restriction on that will be January 1st, 2023. The restriction on sale will be June 30th, 2023. And the 55 lumens per watt, Mr. Speaker, sir, July 1st, 2023 will be the import restriction date, and December 31st, 2023 will be the sale restriction date. I think, sir, that I have established that there's tremendous justification in terms of the, the economic value of this bill, and in terms, sir, of the consumer interests related to this bill, and therefore what we as a government recognize can be realized is being brought to this House to ask for the House's approval. I would want to hope, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we get that approval without any challenge from any quarter. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that as minister, and I've shared this with my colleagues, I can understand that they are very vulnerable households, and I can understand that if we are not completely overtaken by market forces, because I believe, sir, that the LED bulbs in terms of price become more and more attractive as time goes by. But there may still be a case to be made in 2023. I can't stand here and say yes or no. But there may still be a case to be made where you have vulnerable households, low-income households, which may need to benefit from targeted programs of financial assistance. Then that can happen. It will be no excuse to the passage of this bill, sir, and could not have been an escape route for the Democratic Labour Party, because in the same 2011, sir, the Inter-American Development Bank approached all of the countries in the Caribbean in order to start to promote this discussion of energy-efficient lighting, and made available free lights to residential customers, and in fact, free lights to residential customers of the Barbados Light and Power took place in 2011 as part of the sensitization campaign. If it is necessary, sir, we can so structure an approach to targeted approach to low-income households, yet again, if that becomes necessary. But what is inescapable, and in my view, sir, something that we cannot compromise on, and you have to be strong enough in this business to be able to say what you believe in I believe, and I will not shy away from saying I believe, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the incandescent bulb has outlived its usefulness and is more of a liability than it is of value. And we have to move the whole country in the direction of energy efficient lighting, saving Barbados substantial sums collectively in terms of what we are importing. Why do we want to continue to import a piece of technology which we know is going to cost our consumers more money, which we know is not going to last as long as the better quality and newer type of technology, which we know, Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore, is only in the long term going to be something of a humbug to the people that we're here to represent. And that is what this legislation is really about. Now, if I could just share with the honorable members, sir, a few key sections of the bill. At Clause 3, the National Standards Institute is going to be established to identify the domestic minimum energy performance standards. Sorry, not the National Standards Institute will be established because it is already there. It will be required to establish our national energy performance standards for electrical lamps, for local distribution or local use and local sale. At Clause 4, there will be the empowerment of trading standards inspectors. And the trading standards inspector will have the responsibility, sir, of investigating any complaints or alleged contraventions of the Act, and the power to enter premises and conduct tests on any lamps which are found there in order to determine and in order to verify the energy performance characteristics of the bulb. So if you are operating a store, or you may not be operating a store, you may have, sir, some, I don't know, you may be in the business of selling these things, and you may not even do it from one fixed location. You may do it from the back of your car trunk. But the fact of the matter is that the trading standards inspector, when your business is drawn to his attention, will be empowered to say, okay, Mr. Speaker, I want to have a look at the bulbs you're selling. I'm going to have to hold on to it. I'm going to come to that. I'm going to have to hold on to it for a few days in order to test these things so that we know what it is that you are selling and whether it meets the characteristics that are allowed by law. And then it will be returned to you and so on. Now that logically in your legal mind, sir, will raise the next question. Well, if you can hold on to my bulb, what happens with my bulb? Because you hold in my commodity, my merchandise. We've already established that some of these bulbs are in fridges and in stoves and in laboratory equipment, the airport runway lights. We can't hold on to people's merchandise indefinitely and humbug them and frustrate them. That would be to do damage to people's business procedure and business practice. So therefore, sir, the bill treats to that too. At Clause 8, makes it clear that no electrical lamp or other item of merchandise seized as evidence can be held for over 30 days awaiting commencement of proceedings, and that within 7 days of seizure, inspectors must submit the lamps in question to the National Standards Institute to have tests conducted. Mr. Speaker, therefore, it is abundantly clear that if I got to break it down, I will, that if I have your lamp or your bulbs and I am going to bring a case against you, then I have to bring my case. If I'm going to have the physical bulb in evidence, I got to bring the case within 30 days. If I know, or if we know that the case can't be heard within 30 days, then all of the evidence that will become necessary by way of documentary evidence as opposed to physical evidence will have to be taken and put before the court. So we would have the photograph of the bulb, and we would have the import information, and when it is tested, what it actually is as opposed to what it should be, and so on, and that would be the basis on which the prosecution would be dealt with. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, if I am holding, and I did, and let me say, I sent back this bill because I wanted the Chamber of Commerce to be clear that the time frames we're talking about are not unreasonable. And that's where we settle the dates. So because I know that it is important to get on with the people business, equally I know that it is not likely that the court is going to be able to get everything done within 30 days. And a skillful attorney will drag feet So therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, you can't beat the system. You will have now to produce the documentary evidence, and that will be the basis on which we do the prosecution. And equally, sir, within 7 days of seizure, inspectors must submit the lamps to the BNSA and have the test conducted, so that there is a duty on the part of the government agency to get on with it, get the lamps tested, get the information back from the BNSA, and then you have like an affidavit, which is a sworn statement that you can use in the court saying this lamp was duly tested. The authorized testing agency was the National Standards Institute of Barbados. It has been found that this lamp is in fact a 15-watt lamp which runs contrary to the law of Barbados, and therefore it ought not to be offered for sale. Case closed. And that is the key characteristic of the bill, Mr. Speaker, sir. Now, I had spoken about the national energy policy, and I want to say that all aspects of the energy sector are covered by the national energy policy. And that policy provides a framework for transitioning Barbados from a fossil fuel-based economy to a 100% fossil fuel-free, carbon-neutral economy by the year 2030. And as I said just now, and I genuinely believe this, it is important because so many things are happening of a transformative nature in this country. It is important that we take time, I think, to let the people we represent come to a full understanding and a mature appreciation of what it is that is happening in their economy and society, and how their interests are being protected, in some cases affected, and how their interests, sir, are being advanced by this government. If we don't take that time, then we do an injustice not only to ourselves, but we do an injustice to them. And I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, it's important. When I speak about a carbon neutral island, we are saying that there will obviously be some carbon emissions that continue in this country. As much as we would want it to be so, we cannot wholly and solely have renewable energy in Barbados. An aircraft arriving at Grantley Adams International Airport coming from Great Britain, the average one of them has 4 engines. And each of those 4 engines, Mr. Speaker, sir, burning Jet A1 fuel. Mr. Speaker, rich with carbon emission, but they're operating out of Barbados every single day. We inject into our economy that carbon. But we also have, therefore, if we're going to be carbon neutral, to take out of the economy the same amount that we are putting in. And that is what the thrust is going to be. There's got to be a give and take, because we will not get everything at our east level of renewable energy completely green in the foreseeable future. I've had a discussion at the level of cabinet, for example, about the issue of e-mobility, as it is called, electronic vehicles across the board. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, with the best wishes in the world, you're not going to find a Caterpillar or a big tractor that is electronic. There is one which is a prototype now, but they're looking at it and testing it, but it don't exist in Barbados. It is not for sale anywhere. It is a prototype. The reality is, therefore, that as time progresses, it is expected that we will get improvements on the technology. But we have been very ambitious. And we've been ambitious for the very simple reason that this little island must once again lead and be seen to take charge. And that this little island sits, in fact, we in the Caribbean all sit on the forefront of climate change. And nobody is going to take us seriously if we do not make the world understand that a hurricane coming in our direction in this region can destroy 4 or 5 economies and wipe them out in the space of 3-4 hours of climatic event activity. You are 10, 15 years behind where you were at the time the hurricane came. Until people live it, they don't understand it. Because it is quite possible for a hurricane to arrive in Miami, and when it go along about it business, Mr. Speaker, sir, the people that drove up to South Carolina, and the people that drove across to Alabama to seek little shelter, drive back in, and Some palm trees have fallen, some businesses have been shuttered, etc., but their economy is not similarly affected. The small island development scale is completely different. And they don't get that which we experience, or in many cases don't get. They're starting to understand it better now. So we've got to lead by example. And that is what was so unfortunate about the Democratic Labour parties. And I don't go back there just for the sake of going back there. The truth is that there are those people out there who don't want to hear me or any of you in this house, Mr. Speaker, sir, speak about the Democratic Labour Party at all. Because we're to airbrush history. We're to treat history as though you airbrush it and brush out the bad part and make it look good all through. But you can't do that. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that they were short-sighted when they set a goal that we are going to only be 29% renewable energy reliant by the year 2039. Because that is to take a leisurely stroll. Put your hand in your pocket and stroll forward, taking your sweet time on a matter that is essentially, exceptionally critical for the economic well-being of the country. You're spending, in a worst-case scenario, a year like this year, I would not be surprised, Mr. Speaker, sir, given how prices have risen, if we don't have to get close to the $800 million or maybe surpass the $800 million import costs for fossil fuel. It wouldn't surprise me. But how often can you do that? And therefore, if you can avoid doing that, if you could take that money and redirect it to helping young people in your constituency, Mr. Speaker, sir, would you not feel it is a good thing to do? If you could take that money and redirect it to sports development, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that not a good thing to do? If we can light some playing fields around Barbados and make sure that there's opportunity for our young people to be employed and engaged in gainful activity into the evening and burn out some of the excess energy they have, is that not a good thing to do? But it costs money to do it. And that's all that this is about, It is not rocket science. It is about making sure that you take the scarce resources you have and deploy them or redeploy them in a way that makes good sense for the economic development and economic well-being and economic future of the country. In a sense, we are future-proofing the island. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, beyond energy efficiency, it is necessary to explain that we have settled on a number of policies that are designed to achieve affordability and to achieve stability and predictability in the energy sector. And I say again, as I said at the very beginning, affordability is key because we spend too much on the fossil fuels we import. But predictability is also key because I can't plan, and you can't plan, Mr. Speaker, sir, and most people in Barbados cannot plan realistically. If it is that last year you were projecting energy costs at 60% less than what they are now, but if you were planning any activity last year, Mr. Speaker, sir, and one of your major inputs into the operations of the business, which is always energy, has gone up by 60%, it changes your whole business plan and quite frankly may impact the whole business model in terms of its sustainability. And that is the nature of the challenge we are facing. I have no problem with the people who wish to draw it to our attention because they believe that they ain't hear about any politician talking about it, and me ain't know. Not true. We know. But there's also a responsibility we have to think it through and try to work this thing through. And part of the challenge we have, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that it is important for the country to understand that there are some steps which have in fact been taken which redound to our collective well-being, and we have to discuss these too. The establishment, for example, of an electricity market structure that reduces the effects of monopolistic operation in Barbados, where financially and economically feasible, that monopolistic operation had to be brought to a halt. Prior to 2013, Mr. Speaker, it was illegal in Barbados to generate and supply electricity onto the grid. You could generate, you could self-generate, but you could not supply it onto the grid. And that created a set of market characteristics that really were very monopolistic. The Light and Power obviously was the generator and supplier for the country. It was the monopoly. It enjoyed that position for over 100 years. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, it meant, because it had no competition, that cost could climb high. It meant, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there were little incentives, because there's no competition, to drive and improve efficiency. And we all know that this has been a challenge. Where are we today? We have settled on the opening of the electricity market for competition and participation by the private sector of this country. Local investment, and indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, where it is practical, foreign investment as well. And so we have negotiated, and in April of this year, the Light and Power indicated satisfaction by way of letter with the negotiation, and we now will go through the formalities of the public discussion and public signing of the new arrangements. But we have, Mr. Speaker, sir, and all this is done even within the context of COVID. So, you come in here every day or every week, and you get lambasted in here as though you are the worst possible set of people that could be elected. You turn on the radio, and I forgive, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You turn on the radio and you hear the carping criticism, and some of it, sir, is well-intentioned, because a lot of our people really only want the best for this country. But then there are those who are of a more politically oriented hue, H-U-E, and they, sir, feel that this is an opportunity to stir the pot and make things a little bit more difficult for the government, because that is their role, or that is how they perceive their role to be. They do not see themselves to have a developmental role. They do not engage in alternative policies. They engage in carping criticism, pulling down, criticizing, complaining, and that is how they see it. But the fact of the matter is, sir, it is responsible governance that allows us to be sure-footed. We have therefore been able in April to conclude a negotiation with the Barbados Light and Power, which will see 5 licenses being now available to local investors who want to enter this market and to have and be part of what is going to be a new market structure for electricity generation and supply in Barbados. The first license, Mr. Speaker, sir, is a generation license, power generation. Whether you do this by photovoltaics, or whether the panels on your roof, or maybe photovoltaics on the ground mounted and farmed, whether, Mr. Speaker, you do it by wind, and the contemplation is that we will have wind both onshore and offshore. There is about 4,000 more 4,000 times more space offshore Barbados than we have onshore, and therefore, sir, we plan to have both fixed wind farms and floating wind farms off of the coast of this country, set up in such a way that it does not humbug the vista or the horizon for those who are overly interested in the tourism side of things. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, done in such a way that it may actually be a tasteful additive to the tourism product, because there are parts of the world where people visit these wind farms by sea. And therefore, sir, we have not been derelict in our duty in thinking this thing through in that regard either. The second license is an energy storage license, because we're talking largely about renewable energy, and renewable energy technologies at this particular point in time are largely intermittent technology. The sun will not always shine every single day or with the same degree of intensity. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore, there has to be a way of capturing that power that you generate for 5 or 6 hours of a day, when you're actually getting the best of your sun if you're using photovoltaic. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, and you capture that and then you sell it back into the grid. We are also cognizant of the fact that there has, and this is really where the Fair Trade Commission now is doing its work, because they have to set the appropriate tariff for energy storage. But we are cognizant of the fact that what we do not want is energy arbitrage, where people will just simply generate, store with a view to selling at the time when the highest price is available. That is not what we're interested in, and that's what we have to guard against, because there are those people who would seek to humbug a whole country in order to profiteer personally and privately, and that cannot be allowed. Equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's a transmission and distribution license, transmission, distribution, and sales license, which has been negotiated, and that will see and that's basically about the transmission lines, and we all see them every day above ground. One of the things that we are also doing, frankly, is marrying our energy efficiency effort with our physical development effort in the context of resilience. I heard the leader of the House speaking on Friday and talking about resilience being part of the school curricula, so that our young people understand what we mean when we speak in the language of resilience. It is part of now the thinking in education as well. Therefore, if you drive along Highway 1 now, Mr. Speaker, sir, in large measure it's substantially improved. Not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel proud to have been the parliamentary representative who is first in Barbados to be able to say to his constituents, well, you're now in a position where your overhead cables can be put underground right across the length of that coast. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it means that when the hurricane come, you don't have to worry about the lights going off. You don't have to worry, sir, about losing the pole, come fall down on your house. You don't have to worry about the wires and the water that you can't see and people getting electrocuted. All of these are risks that are confronted day by day in small island states across this Caribbean, and indeed in parts of continental United States of America. And this Barbados Labour Party, sir, at great cost and with great effort, have been able to start the process of future-proofing. That's part of what this is about. And Mr. Speaker, sir, equally, the other license is about dispatch, which is really operating the system, moving power from point to point across the island. Those 5 licenses will be, for administrative purposes, treated as 3. So you have generation and energy storage as 1, transmission, distribution, and sales as 2, and dispatch, Mr. Speaker, sir, as the 3rd. And it is essentially important to understand that the establishment of that market structure will be characterized by maximum participation of local entrepreneurs and international partners, and it will be done via long-term agreements, which will be called power purchase agreements, and with independent power producers, between independent power producers and the utility. Just so that everybody understands, you will have the independent power producer being competitive in the production of the generation and storage of electricity. That is area where anybody can get in and compete. And then there will be the grid network side, where you will have transmission and you will have distribution, and that will be done by the utility. Utility purchasing that power that you provide. And so therefore we have moved from a monopoly, as the economists would say, to a monopsony, where you have a single purchaser. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, generation and storage at amounts over those which are prescribed in the feed-in tariff will be subjected to a competitive procurement. And you must recognize that we are looking at the possibility of having large-scale investment, for example, at sea. There are no big lot of people clamoring to go 10 miles out to sea and establish a fixed foundation at the bottom in order to make sure that you can put wind farm on the water surface. Those types of investments may run into substantial scale, several $100 million. And therefore, sir, it is important to have a competitive procurement so that if somebody is interested in that, then we say to them, well, let's see what other people are interested in doing. And sharpen the pencil. Don't come in a fat. Let us make it as tight as possible, because ultimately that is where the people of the country are benefiting. We want to make sure that it is competitively procured, because if you have to compete, chances are you're looking to profiteer as much as you are trying to make sure you give a realistic cost option to the country. And that is where we are at, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Light and Power is assigned the role of, also in these licenses, the role of reliability backstop, especially in the transmission and distribution sales license. And that simply means, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the independent power producers will have to supply capacity to the grid. But in the event that an independent power producer is confronted with a situation that may negatively affect his ability to deliver what we expect him to deliver. So say, for example, you have a 5 megawatt photovoltaic farm, but you run into hard times, or you don't maintain it properly. The country is relying on your 5 megawatts of energy. We can't have somebody lying down on the operating table in the hope of getting light. We have to have certainty. So if it is that you now are running into difficulty, you are required to make some reports to the Light and Power, and the Light and Power is required to make some reports to the Ministry of Energy so that they can oversee the process. Mr. Speaker, sir, if it is that you do run into a challenge, then there can be a backstop, or there must be a backstop, where the independent power producer is then able to be supplemented by other power producers who can say, look, I have the capacity to fill those 5 megawatts that he dropped out of, and so I am prepared to do that. And then that person is paid either at the base rate or under a power purchase agreement which is designed for that purpose. So that backstop is to provide us with the energy security and reliability that we want. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we are paying close attention to is our two principles, which are basically that the market, which provides for competition in generation, energy, and storage of electricity, must also be a market that provides for unbundling of the accounting of the Light and Power. This is a major tenet of all of the licenses, to promote transparency and to promote competitive conduct and fairness in the marketplace. The Light and Power will be unbundled, Mr. Speaker, sir, through accounting means into separate functional components. Those components will be, first of all, generation, then the storage, and transmission and distribution. The Light and Power remains a single legal entity in this arrangement, but, sir, there will be the equivalent of what you might call Chinese walls, an artificial way of separating what the costs are for generation, what the costs are for storage, what the costs are for transmission and distribution. And the reason why we do this is because you don't want cross-subsidization to take place and have artificially high charges built into this system. Right now, there are some generators that are operating there which are almost as old as me. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, sir, that may tell a tale about their efficiency. It certainly must tell a tale about their maintenance costs. And what we want to do is to make sure that we are clear as to what the real costs are in every aspect of the business, so that we, as I say, can avoid cross-subsidization and make sure that whenever you come to the output end, you can come to the output end with a clear understanding of what the costs are in each category of activity that is taking place. We do this, sir, not to be difficult, but we do this in the interest of the consumer, so that the consumer can have certainty in this new market structure. And it is critical that the costs of generation and supply to the grid are separate and distinct from the cost of dispatch on the grid or the cost of transmission and distribution across the grid. And therefore, separate accounts will be maintained in order to avoid, as I said, the likelihood of any cross-subsidization. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other additional obligation that is built in is an obligation to serve, and that is built into the transmission and distribution license. And as I worked with the team on these negotiations, I felt very strongly about this particular part, Mr. Speaker, because my constituency is in part urban and in part rural. And so I understand some of the plight of both sides of this island very well. And in St. Peter, for example, sir, there's a place called Lonesome Hill. And in St. Joseph, there's a place called Dark Hole. And you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's a social need to supply power to places that may not always be deemed economically viable. And so if you have a small rural community, but it costs a lot of money to reach that small rural community, you can't have crass capitalistic considerations saying, boy, that costs too much money, so then go bread for themselves. Can't work. And so therefore you have to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that there is that obligation to serve built in, and the Light and Power has agreed to that in the new structure, and the 5 licensing regime, as well as the rules that must be in place to support that 5 license regime are agreed to. And as I said, we will come in very short order to the formalities of public declaration, discussion, and signature of licenses, etc. The licenses, the honourable member who leads the opposition would be pleased to know, also take into consideration the very important need for local capacity building and local development. We are talking about a new sector. We are talking about a sector that offers career opportunities, potential human resource development opportunities for the people of Barbados. And under the licenses, the Light and Power will be responsible, Mr. Speaker, for contributing towards the skill sets and the development of expertise and technical know-how in this local renewable energy sector. Your constituents, sir, must feel that there are jobs available to them, not only by climbing up on somebody's roof to be an installer, not only, Mr. Speaker, sir, to do maintenance and repair, but there must be jobs available to them in design, and there must be jobs available to them in the engineering aspects of it. And there must be jobs, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the high end. The skill sets are critical, and we must develop the country as a whole. So the Light and Power is mandated under the licensing arrangement to host paid and full-time and paid part-time internships, participate in a UWI Cave Hill Applied Research and Development Program, which will enable us to do something else that we have to do. There are a lot of people in Barbados, again, who content themselves with criticism only, have not come to realize that we have now become leaders. We've become leaders in this sector in the Caribbean. I heard the Energy Minister of Trinidad and Tobago on Friday. In fact, he spoke immediately after the lead of government business spoke on the news clip, talking about their having lost $2 billion in their oil and gas sector, and that the need is now for them in Trinidad to move more seriously in the direction of RE. Who would have thought the day would dawn when Barbados was there in energy and Trinidad hoping to catch up? Now, Mr. Speaker, obviously they're going to do this thing at a greater scale because it's a larger country. In many ways, it is a different economy. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, conceptually, this is where we are. The buses, the electric buses on the road in Barbados today constitute the largest fleet in the Caribbean. That is a fact. That is a fact. So that, sir, part of what we have to do is to continue to build out that human resource capacity so that this country can, in many ways, become a living laboratory as to how a small developing state, a small island state, can be able to shift from a reliance on fossil fuel onto becoming a renewable energy-driven economy, and to do so in a way that creates an abundance of opportunity for employment for our people at all levels of the process. Also, under the generation, storage, and the transmission and distribution and sales licenses, the Light and Power will be required to spend annually in Barbados an agreed percentage of the prior year's income on research and development activities. And that will be towards the goal of assisting us to get closer to the 100% renewable energy. The other thing, sir, that I felt very strongly about in the licenses was decommissioning. And we've made provision in the licenses for a decommissioning fund, which will sit with the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Finance, but will be contributed to by the Light and Power. And quite frankly, sir, we are in the process of working out model power purchase agreements. And I would want to see that when you have investments made at utility scale, which is above 1 megawatt, then especially those very large utility scale ones, Mr. Speaker, sir, the decommissioning issues still arise. Let us make sure that we have them contribute to the decommissioning fund as well. Because, sir, one lesson that we learned in this country that we should all never forget is that sometimes you have these big players who are here, and then when once time comes that you have to pack up and go, or that you have to clean up after them, sir, the cleanup process is long, it is arduous, and it is frustrating, and it is exceptionally expensive. This government continues to grapple with one at the mobile site, even as I stand before you, sir. So I wanted, sir, to just take a few minutes to explain, as we were talking about renewable energy and energy efficiency, the broader context within which the government's work has been being conducted, certainly during the last 10 months, the 11 months that I have been minister. I feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to give the House, and by extension the country, an understanding of that which we are doing in the people's name, and that which, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are trying to achieve so as to ensure that this critical sector that impacts either directly or indirectly, in fact, not even indirectly, this sector impacts directly on every other sector in the Barbados' economy. And therefore, sir, we have to make sure that people understand what it is that is happening and must feel that they can become conversant with the new market structure, those ideas which may not be, with which they may not be so familiar, but those things, Mr. Speaker, sir, which will sooner rather than later become a day-to-day lived reality for them all and for us all. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, if I go back then to the main bill, I want to ask, sir, that this House accept the proposed provisions of the bill. I want to ask, sir, that the House give it its fullest support in the interest of bringing efficient light into this country and within the context that we have outlined in the bill, so that we can once again take a very important step, not only to tidy up the reckless disregard of the last administration, but, Mr. Speaker, sir, to set a proper course for the future direction and development of the people of Barbados. I am obliged to you, sir. Beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Beg to second that, sir.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, free market is regarded by some as a blessing. Free market circumstance obtaining in a mixed economy such as ours is regarded by some as a blessing. Some, though, Mr. Speaker, experience it as a bane, because it does not work necessarily in their interest. And you have some of those ugly features that obtain in which we are all familiar. Monopoly, and the honorable member who last spoke made reference to the existence of monopoly in Barbados with respect to energy. Then there's the practice of consolidation, which is often facilitated by some of the key institutions in the economy and of the country, sometimes even at the highest level of government. The practice of price gouging, to which we're often exposed, which of course capital interests always deny, always promised that that would not be their disposition. And when challenged that that is the reality that people are experiencing, they would deny this and seek to offer other explanations as to why we are seeing inflationary tendency in the prices in the market. So free market is both a blessing, depending on where you sit, and a bane, depending, of course, on where you sit. But market dynamics should not always be allowed to dictate terms in economies such as ours. I would want to think, therefore, that the bill before the House today reflects the minister's view that the market dynamics cannot always be allowed to be the singular influence operating in the economy. If he brings the bill out of that view of things, then I believe that he will find that there are those who will support the effort. If he's of the view that government in economies such as ours has a significant role with respect to creating the regulatory framework that influences what happens in the market in the interests of the majority, especially in the interests of consumers and in the face of existing monopolies with respect to different sectors, in this case, the energy sector. If the minister is saying, I've brought this bill here for the consideration of this House because I believe that government has a significant role with respect to the matter of creating the regulatory framework that will contribute significantly to what happens in the market, I believe that he will find support. I believe he's of this view, even though he let it slip from his lips, that in general terms, we are price takers. That may be true. But even that view reinforces the fact that in an economy such as ours, where largely we are consumers, that role of being the regulator in chief or chief entity responsible for creating the regulatory framework that helps us to absorb some of the pressure that we feel as consumers in the economy. If he's there, I believe he will find that there are people who are there with him. Government is a regulator in chief, and we are price takers largely, but the government as an entity has a significant responsibility, especially the government with this majority, this mandate of being price shapers as well. It cannot always be left to market forces singularly. There are energy savings to be derived. The honorable member did some mathematical gymnastics when he spoke in seeking to lay an assault against the former administration, and if that is what he chooses to do, well, that then is his business. I'm not getting into that bit of it. But in attempting to lay an assault against the former administration, he did some gymnastics with respect to his mathematical calculations in an effort to reinforce his point. I will not join him with the gymnastics, but the point is taken that if we go down the route that the bill before us suggests that we should, then it will redound to the benefit of all of us as individuals. It will be redound to the benefit of businesses. It will redound to the benefit of economy in terms of the level of cost savings which will be affected. Energy costs in Barbados, I think, still are among the highest in the region. And that perhaps is not only because of the monopoly situation which has existed, But for several other reasons, we find ourselves being subject to paying some of the highest costs with reference to energy in the region. And the honorable minister that also suggests that electricity generation accounts for about half, 50% of our import bill with respect to fossil fuels. Therefore, there's an abundant responsibility upon the government of the day to seek to address the high costs of energy in Barbados and to move us to a place where energy costs are significantly reduced because of its impact upon the pockets of the consuming public, because of its impact upon businesses, and then the ripple effect across the business environment that has to do with the ability to provide for jobs and the cost, of course, attaching to products, etc., etc., etc. Energy savings, therefore, significant importance to the Barbados economy. The high import energy bill, high import food bill are things that we need to, as swiftly as we possibly can, run away from and bring amendments and corrections to that type of situation. We need carefully to understand what is the required energy level for the output that we desire and move to that point. And I think the legislation is intended to help us to move in that direction so that we achieve what the minister calls efficiency. Efficiency in lighting, efficiency in lighting output. My honorable friend suggested, and rightfully so, Barbados is not alone in this. These are the trends that have obtained now for more than a decade, almost decade and a half, where regions and countries are going in this direction, where we're seeking to have significant improvements in energy efficiency with respect to the provision of lighting. And even countries who are energy producers themselves moving in this direction, far less countries such as Barbados, who are largely consumers in the energy market. So we are not out of step with what is happening in the world. Simply a matter of making the adjustments appropriately so to our domestic context. The honorable member talked about the importance of the reduction of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, etc. And I think perhaps that is really a point. That's a point that has to be made, but I think that sometimes it is a point that is oversold. It is laudable that we make the point with respect to carbon emissions. It is expected, and reasonably so, that we join and be in step with the rest of the world insofar as that is concerned, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are most vulnerable and exposed to the turbulent changes, turbulent impacts coming out of emanating from climate change. But as a matter which, to me, is a bit oversold, because I do not know that, comparatively speaking, we generate the kind of carbon emission levels here that are of any significance when compared to what is happening in the wider world, especially in the industrialized world. It's a little oversold, though I accept that it is a point properly perhaps to be made in a discussion such as this. My concern is not so much addressing matters of carbon emissions. My concern would be that we do realize the cost savings, that we do achieve the efficiency levels that we want to achieve by amending legislation or introducing legislation that speaks to efficiency with respect to lighting output and lighting fixtures and lighting facilities and implements which are used. But I have a couple of other concerns which I would very quickly and briefly want to put on the table. These are the kind of matters which are often overlooked in discussions like these. The kind of things which are not necessarily immediately the focus of legislation when it comes to initiatives such as the one before us. We as a country still continue to struggle with the issue of productivity in the workplace in Barbados. And I wonder the extent to which we have considered as to how lighting impacts, inefficient lighting impacts productivity in the workplace. Normally when we talk about productivity in the workplace, we look to blame workers, we look to worker attitudes and all of that, and some of that should perhaps rightly become the focus of attention. But there are other issues that we should consider when it comes to the matter of productivity in the workplace. Scientifically, it has been proven that a rate of productivity is significantly influenced and impacted by lighting efficiency and lighting capacity and lighting context. Just like that, just like many other things, I should say, rather than any other thing, many other things. You look around this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, these chairs in your house, your honorable house, Mr. Speaker, really belong to an era far behind us. These chairs are not the most, ergonomically suited for the work that you do in your house, Mr. Speaker. And I do not know why in 2021 we are sitting down in these chairs that cause tremendous strain and pressure on your back. I'm using a cushion, Mr. Speaker. I know there are one or two others here who are using cushions. These chairs ought to be out of this place. You need to clear your house of these chairs, if I may humbly suggest. And no, put Bajans out of work. We want to put the people's representatives in a better position to be more productive in what they do and to be more willing to sit in their seats and occupy their elected spaces when meeting time comes. We're not looking to put Bajans out of work. But, Mr. Speaker, these chairs are not particularly, in my view, humbly, suited for what we do. There are other things, but the subject is lighting capacity today. Across the Barbadian market, the labor market, across the business environment in Barbados, to what extent is poor lighting contributing to diminished levels of productivity or undesirably low levels of productivity in the workplace? The public service, the largest employer perhaps still in Barbados. One isn't too sure these days. But to what extent is poor lighting quality impacting upon the capacity of public servants to do their job and to do it at the most productive rate? As I said, and it can be researched, Mr. Speaker, scientifically it has been established that inefficient lighting reduces productivity in the workplace. And any country faced with that problem of productivity in the workplace ought to be looking, in addition to other things, at the matter of lighting in the workplace. It is also very clearly established by the science, and the Minister of Education, honorable friend out of Southeast St. Michael, would want perhaps to have some attention put to that. To what extent is it affecting the learning capacity of our young people? And one may say, well, you're at school during the day, and no need perhaps for the type of lighting capacity or quality that you're talking about. I don't know that is true. But even if that is true, you do a lot of studying at home, and especially in poor homes in Barbados. Our children being affected by the lighting circumstance in which they find themselves. The honorable member of St. James Central made the point that when we get into the business of ensuring that more efficient lighting becomes the norm in Barbados, and houses operating at a certain economic level are faced with a challenge, then of course government will see it as its responsibility to try to respond to that challenge and help them. The fact of the matter right now, our children are reflecting, manifesting certain deficiencies or competency levels in learning, in assimilating that which is dispensed to them or shared with them, that to which they're exposed. And there could be a lot of reasons why this, and indeed there are a lot of reasons why this could be. But has any consideration, any study, any query, any inquiry ever been made to the impact of lighting? You may go from school where the efficient lighting is available, quality of lighting is acceptable or appropriate, but at home it is another story. And these things are a matter of science. They're not a matter of imagination. We're not talking about some television reality, so to speak. We're talking about life in the real world. And our children are their capacity to concentrate, the level of alertness, and the ability to assimilate that which is shared with them, especially in poor homes. I come from a vintage to which the honorable member of St. Michael Southeast would not be familiar. She would not have been exposed to this. But I did a lot of my studying by kerosene lamp. There's some folks among us who may not even know what a kerosene lamp is. But I did a lot of my studying by kerosene lamp. And I'm sure you did too, Mr. Speaker. And I may not be the best of examples to use as a product of that environment, but you certainly stand out. And people can see that even when you study in those situations, if you have the will and the capacity, you can make it as you did. But there are a lot of people who today, I believe, are challenged in their home situation, their away from school situation, perhaps with respect to the lighting, to which they must subject themselves as they seek to learn, and maybe even in the school environment. So I simply put that there for what it is worth. And to add to the debate and the discussion today, I don't know that there's a lot to argue about. We perhaps will have another day where we could talk about the deconstruction of the monopoly existing around provision of energy in Barbados, light and power, as the minister introduced it today. I wasn't totally happy the way he introduced it. I think the country needs to hear more, and more so fully. They will on that matter. I didn't like the way it was incidentally introduced today, because it is really a massive and major thing. And I heard the honorable minister talk about all of the concessions to which BL&P, obligations then, to which BL&P will find itself exposed and liable, helping with skills development and training, providing lighting in a social way to far out places. I've always heard about Lonesome Hill. I don't know where it is. And Dark Hole, I know where Dark Hole is. And then there's some other obligation, research and development, I think he said. And like the power under the agreement is committing itself to all of these things, and we look forward to those commitments being honored. I have my fears, but we look forward to that, and we look forward to greater ventilation of the issue. So we're not going to argue a lot about the light and power and the deconstruction of the monopoly today. That time will come. But certainly the build out of a renewable energy sector, an expanded energy sector that's demonopolized, the allowance for entrance into that market, into that sector of domestic players, is something which is desired and desirable. I do believe that for the government to suggest a limit of 30% domestic participation is a misstep. I have heard attempts to walk back from that and to suggest that 30% is a base, is a minimum, and not a ceiling. And we hope that it is. But like I said, as a discussion from the concern today, Mr. Speaker, how does this business of lighting efficiency or inefficiency, lighting capacity and quality, impacting the workplace with respect to productivity? How is it impacting our young people with respect to learning? And then we have now come into a cultural context where a lot of time is spent exposed to these newer screens, this newer What kind of lighting? You call that blue light? I think you call that blue light. Not sure. You're brighter than me, Mr. Speaker. Minister Energy would know. But we're exposed to all these lighting with all these gadgets, the television, the laptop, the tablet, the desktop, even the phones, all these things. And our people, our young people, are spending a lot of time glued to this thing. We have now, to a large extent, shifted out of circumstance, out of necessity, to online learning. So more time spent before a computer screen, more time spent in front of the kind of light that is injurious to your vision, as I understand it. And I think that these are things that we have to be seriously concerned about. They're not the kind of things that excite some politicians, and they're not the kind of things that you go down the road and boast that the government is addressing because they ain't vote catching, perhaps. But hey, government's responsibility is to protect, firstly, its people, and to help to create the context in which the people are provided for. And therefore, I believe that these things are important, very important. So we have had exposure now to a culture where the norm is for young people to be glued to these screens all the time, to these gadgets all the time. And the question is, how is it impacting their vision? You grew up, Mr. Speaker, spending much time playing cricket. Maybe you played on Combermere Pass. I played a lot of cricket there, football there. Put some lashes in Combermere once in a football game, which I do remember very well. You can quiz me on that after if you want. And we were out there and developed physically and socially by physical activities that we're engaged, sporting activities. Our generations today are spending their time in front of these screens. Even in this place, when we sit here, I see people focused on screens because they're busy doing government's work. And they focus on screens. What's the impact on the eye health? And these things are important. Yeah, perhaps the last thing I was saying, Mr. Speaker, you see this business of these big, bright, beaming white lights? It's becoming, Mr. Speaker, more than a nuisance. It is a veritable hazard on our roads at night. People drive seemingly an attitude of indifference. Used to be a time when cordially you dim your lights approaching somebody. The fellas hardly do it now. Thank God for those who do. But if you drive at night, and I suspect that you do, Mr. Speaker, you run into this. And I wonder any consideration. I've seen elsewhere, not white light, but yellow light. Yellow lighting on vehicles. And I encourage the Minister of Energy, if that is a responsibility, or the Minister of Transport, if that is his responsibility, to seriously look at this matter. This white light is totally unnecessary with the number of vehicles on the road, with the narrowness of our roads, the speed at which people travel, and the indifferent attitudes that are coming in. We need to do something about this. I do not know the extent to which blinding light at nights would have caused vehicle accidents in Barbados or even road fatality. I don't know. But I just know that I have seen elsewhere, and it is less harsh on the eyes. I don't know if you've ever seen it, Mr. Speaker. But I think, I'm not good on colors, but I think it's yellow light. And you still see where you're going, but you don't offend or expose other people to the dangers that we have to face here. I look forward to hearing more on the deconstruction of the monopoly around provision of energy in Barbados. And I do look forward that when that time comes, that the company in question would honor all its obligations to the government and the people of Barbados, although my faith is weak. I do look forward that we have that expansion in the energy sector, as the minister intimated, and he talked about all kinds of energy on land and energy sources on land and on sea and in the air. We look forward to those days. Barbadians must be moved and brought to a place of a better quality of life. And it is not beyond truth to suggest that the efficiency with respect to lighting is a consideration that has to be properly taken on board. Thank you, sir.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Let me at the outset say thank you to the Honourable Minister and member for St. James Central for making what is often a very complex subject seem so very straightforward. To bring a bill here about the control of inefficient lighting, for the most part, most Bajans will probably say, but what is that?
Yes,
Because there are those of us who know that there are some people who, despite having a structure to live under, may not even have electricity within the households. And we discovered, even through the early stages of the pandemic, many children as well in homes where the issue of having a device was further compounded by having a device and not having anywhere to plug it into. And we all know what that experience and the inequalities that have been flagged up by the system have pretty much taught us. But inefficient lighting in the context of our society at this point in time, and Minister Simmons has indicated, the journey that we have come along to get to this point, one which I recall certainly being in the other place in Bridgetown, and hearing the then administration speak about energy in a way which gave us all, I would have to say, a tremendous set of hope. There was really no divide on either side as it relates to the need to have an energy policy, or the thrust with which government and the pace at which government should move in being able to accelerate the energy program. But it is unfortunate, as with most other areas of the last administration's tenure, that this has been allowed to languish for so long, and really we have again been playing catch up in trying to get the wheels of energy sector moving yet again to be able to redound to the benefit of all Barbadians. Put simply, we are replacing the incandescent bulbs with what would be termed the inefficient lighting, more LEDs within the households. I think for the most part, as often happens, Barbadians tend to not wait on government and have perhaps done their own research, understood that this is an area which can bring down their electricity bill, and many of them have essentially moved in that direction. But it still requires that government tidy up that which has not been put in place to make sure that it is clear, not only in sending a signal to average households and Barbadians, but certainly to the global community, that Barbados is serious about energy sector, that it is serious about reducing the carbon emissions, that it is serious about its energy policy, and therefore that we will do all within our power as a small nation to be able to ensure that we comply with the international standards. For the most part, the larger companies have started to place bans and started to phase out incandescent lighting, and really we are, in a sense, I won't say playing catch up, but we are legislatively now putting the mechanisms in place for a framework within which the suppliers of these incandescent bulbs will have to operate. I recall many years ago when we spoke about this in parliamentary group, I joked about the fact that the last administration, in an effort to create the interest in the energy sector, donated several bulbs, electric bulbs, LED bulbs, to several households through the constituency councils at the time. And it was more of a political move as opposed to doing all of the other things that were necessary to be done in order to make that transition for persons to have energy efficiency within their households. Because to give somebody a bulb, but then you haven't ensured that the upgrades are done to the household, or you haven't provided the necessary framework to make that transition, in itself speaks volumes in terms of the focus of the then administration. But we didn't just talk about energy. We came to office, and despite all that had not been done, we picked up the mantle. Both ministers have both the current minister and the predecessor have both picked up the mantle and run with it and tried to get things back on track. And so what we've seen over the course of the last few years is obviously a transformation of the energy sector, building on what has been started, but certainly beginning to flesh out the makings of a sector from which money can be generated for the economy, but also that business people are also able to make a living, that our young people in particular are able to enter another field that is obviously ever-changing, and therefore that we can see the efficiency in terms of lighting that the country requires. I recall even during the last by-election, can't say that I heard the buses passing, but there was certainly a level of glee in the hearts of many Barbadians as they saw electric buses, one of the largest fleets to be purchased in decades, at political meetings, moving through the country. And I know that many Barbadians are pleased to know that we took it upon ourselves to solve that problem as it relates to the transportation situation in this country, not simply by purchasing a bus or repairing a bus, but a government that understands as well that in order to purchase the buses, you have to also plan for the future as well. And therefore, it was important that the type of buses that we brought to the country were such that we were able to stand here boldly today and speak to a wider policy in energy that this administration has embarked on. But it hasn't ended there, because the interesting thing, I heard the Honorable Leader of the Opposition speak to schools and looking at energy efficiency in schools and whether productivity is affected by a poor lighting situation. And you know what is interesting is that since last year, we've been looking at this issue within our schools. It's not just the teaching profession that has been affected by the poor lighting, but also our students as well have been impacted by poor lighting in classrooms. Many of the schools, as you're well aware, Mr. Speaker, have been in a very poor state for several years. We have been embarking on a very ambitious program year by year to try to improve the conditions. And it's not just the roof structures and the painting of the buildings or erection of murals and boards at the schools, but we've also been looking at the very conditions that students and teachers have to operate in. And therefore, government committed the sum of $4.4 million to start the process of electrical upgrades across our schools. Now, I want the Honourable Member and Leader of the Opposition to understand that that is really a drop in the bucket. And I want the country to understand that that is but a drop in the bucket for what it is that needs to be done in this country across our school plans. But in addition to the 4.4, obviously we have had to do all of the other extensive repairs. And we get it that we cannot put ourselves in a position where we try to patch a number of the schools, especially in relation to electricity. We're going to obviously have to look at the worst schools, the worst school plants in terms of electrical issues, and start to work on those. And as we get additional funds, be able to put the next set of schools into that lot and ensure that we're able to address the problems of electricity and certainly energy efficiency across our schools. The survey that we did in relation to many of the schools, they were all common denominators. Over the years, without proper planning, obviously the breakers have become increasingly overloaded. Expansion to the plant has been very ad hoc, and that has meant that with the ad hoc vision for the expansion of school plants, you've ended up with more loads than are necessary on a number of the breakers. We also witnessed the fact that in many of the classrooms, and in particular, I remember visiting St. George Primary, which had been very neglected for several years, and noticing that, again, once the classroom windows are closed, that students and teachers would have extreme difficulty in being able to focus in the classroom. And especially as the bad weather comes in and there's heavy rains, the windows are closed for that reason. And again, it has made the inability of our teachers and students to operate in that type of environment obviously very difficult. We've also had issues with the fittings being very old. You go into some classrooms and you see those kind of box fittings, not the nice ones that are in this building, and in many other of the government buildings now. But you found that there were a lot of those heavy fittings that were in place, or in some cases, the incandescent lighting that was in the classroom environment. The other issue that we encountered was also that the security lighting on the buildings was not functioning. You have many of the old electrical fittings on the outside of buildings, but when you visit the schools, oftentimes the fittings are not working, or in some cases, they are not properly connected to the electrical areas. The schools, in many cases, require the additional sockets, and I recall as well going to several classrooms and encountering that the electrical supply in a particular classroom was disconnected. And why? Because on the one hand, there is some who feel that it's a distraction to have the children trying to charge their phones or trying to charge their devices. But the truth is that in many cases, it was also because of the electrical issues that presented themselves at the school, and it was felt that it was probably better to have the supply in those particular areas shut off for that purpose. So in response to all of that, we have determined that we will start with about 7 schools for this summer. Those schools at the primary level being St. Christopher Primary, Welch's Primary, Wesley Hall Primary, Westbury Primary, St. George Primary, St. John Primary, and Belmont Primary. And it is not just, Mr. Speaker, a case of only doing electrical upgrades, because I want the members of the public to understand as well that when we do upgrades to electrical issues on the plant, there's also a component that requires us sometimes to impact on the civil works within the same plant as well. And so some of the works will see the upgrades to the security system. It will also allow us to see upgrades to the cameras within the schools and to ensure that there's adequate lighting at the plants and that children can now once again be able to utilize and to charge devices within the classroom as we move towards more and more concepts of smart classrooms for our children to be able to operate in. The last school which I will mention, which will be also able to have an electrical upgrade to some aspects of the plant, is the Wilkie Cumberbatch Primary School. Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last few months, we've been plagued with some challenges there at the school. In particular, the heavy rains, I believe last year, would have impacted what was already a very deteriorating structure at the school. And one of the schools, I must tell you, that was due for a full rebuild, but regrettably, that financing was lost in the last decade. So we have been now also yet again plagued with this situation where we have the responsibility to replace almost an entire floor of the main block at that school, but at the same time to carry out some electrical upgrades to that property and indeed to ensure that we have some energy efficiency at the institution as well through the upgrades with the LED lighting. But at the same time, we will be able to take some of the money from the savings on VAT on the electrical upgrade project to be able to put into the Wilkie Cumberbatch School. So that will give us a total of 8 schools that for this domestic summer program in the coming year that we will be able to target for full electrical upgrades to the school plan. Now, it is not just in the primary schools that we are working with the Ministry of Energy, certainly to be able to assist the ministry to embark on government's transformation program in the energy sector. Obviously, we have the relationship with the several government buildings that fall under the portfolio. The Ministry of Education, I believe, is due shortly to have some retrofitting in terms of its electrical fittings. And again, that speaks to the wider position of government, that government buildings themselves, you have to lead by example. And therefore, our government buildings must be properly equipped with the necessary energy efficiency if we are going to say to the general public that they too must also join us in ensuring that these things are done. We also have taken the position at the level of the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology that when it comes to training of our young people, of our people generally, that we must have an institution that responds to the growing demands of the sector. And we've had several meetings, we've had several discussions with the Ministry of Energy about how to ensure that our students are properly trained to not only maintain the electric buses, but also to address the issues relating to the photovoltaics and become installers of these pieces of equipment, and also to ensure that they can be the roof fitters as well with the photovoltaics also. And we've started that training because the buses didn't just come and we placed them on the road. We also had a program at SJPA to ensure that people were adequately trained to be able to continue to maintain and to certainly repair these vehicles. The last project that at the moment that we are working on with the Ministry of Energy in the energy sector is the replacement, or rather the installation of photovoltaics on about 21 secondary schools, and that is one that we are working very hard, both ministers and both ministries, to ensure that we are also able to embark on during the upcoming summer months as well. That will be a considerable saving to the government of Barbados generally, and certainly a tremendous benefit to the Ministry of Education, because I'm hopeful that any savings made from energy can then be diverted back into the Ministry of Education to help us to deal with a number of the infrastructural issues that are continuing to confront us in this particular sector. But, Mr. Speaker, before I pause on this one, because my intervention was really to show the synergies that are taking place and the foresight that is taking place in relation to government's agenda in the energy sector, I want to raise an issue that certainly troubles me, and I suspect troubles many of my other colleagues, and it relates to the issue of households having to confront this challenge of not being able to pay their electricity bills. And, you know, every day I get a call from somebody, you know, expressing concern about the electricity having just been cut. And oftentimes you find that people, they hope, they wait until the bill is at that point where it has been disconnected to seek intervention, because they always hope that they can find the resources to be able to pay the bill. But in this environment, while the players in the market have facilitated, for the most part, the very early stages of COVID, I want to make the appeal to the company that has a responsibility for being the entity that sends out the bills, to re-examine the approach to households in relation to the payment of electricity bills, because it has a direct impact certainly on my ministry when electric supply is cut off, because I have children in households that then cannot access the electricity. Now, I will not support anybody being able to earn a living and not pay their bills. That is not what I'm saying, sir. But I'm simply saying that we are in a very difficult environment right now. Many people are still not working. I don't think that we're in an environment where if people could pay, they would refuse to pay. But there are genuine cases that are coming to the fore that all of us are well aware of, where I do feel that there needs to be a little bit more leniency being exercised by the entity responsible for light in this country. And I know that, you know, the interventions certainly that I have made, I've been met with very good, you know, customer interaction, appealing on behalf of constituents. But I do want to make the wider appeal, because it really does concern me when I hear parents calling and saying that, you know, they don't know what they're going to do next week because Light and Power may have cut off their electric supply on a Friday afternoon, and the children have work to do on the weekend, or they're not going to be able to do online school because they are not able to get online. So while I know that attempts are being made to get people to call in and to make arrangements to pay, I'm simply saying both to the supplier and certainly to the persons being supplied with electricity that it works both ways. You have to be understanding about the current circumstances, but equally, if you are in a position to pay, don't wait till the bill gets cut off. Pay something towards the bill and make a case that you need a little bit more time. But it is unreasonable sometimes for people to have to, you know, have a bill of $1,000 and then be told that they got to pay $950 in order to turn it back on. It simply is not going to work. And it is really creating some serious problems for us in education. And I just wanted to raise it, sir, because I know that there are many who have ears and will listen. And there are those of us who may be able to assist with a $200 or $300 here and there to get a connection put back on. But when you have as many constituents as I do, who all may be calling, asking for the assistance, sir, it is difficult. And all of us, I'm sure, sir, you face the same thing as well. As I said, it will not be like this forever. And those who have perhaps benefited over the years from being able to have the payments being made, I would ask and implore you to be in a position to exercise a greater degree of leniency on the people of this country at this point in time. So, sir, I want to support this particular bill. Thank the minister for being able to bring it today. Again, the timing is perhaps perfect because we are kind of at that point now where all of the ministries are gearing up and rethinking and relooking how we address the energy sector and looking at the synergies that can be made, certainly with the Honorable Minister's ministry. And therefore, we are on the ball in terms of trying to pull the entire framework together to ensure that we not only address the issues locally in terms of energy efficiency, but certainly that we send a message globally as well that Barbados is compliant with the international standards and is certainly interested in ensuring that we bring down our fuel costs, that we're able to make this country more energy efficient. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of this sitting until 2 p.m., please.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 2 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 2 p.m.